So this is the brand new Razer Blade 14, the 2022 model, and it's not a massive update compared to the previous one, but there are a bunch of tiny little updates to improve this laptop that last year's version didn't have. Now, from a design standpoint, this is fairly new. This form factor for Razer just came out last year, and it's a 14-inch gaming notebook. If that's what you want, this is the market that this laptop is catering to. It's still using a beautiful black anodized aluminum. It has that anti-fingerprint resistant coating. Yes, it still gets fingerprints, but it takes a bit longer to get super greasy instead of extra greasy without the coating. It has the same amount of ports, which on the left-hand side has a USB-A port. You have your Type-C port, and then an audio jack. The proprietary power connector is still 230 watts, so the same as last year. You have a full-size HDMI port, USB-A, and then another USB Type-C port. Now, because this is using an AMD processor, it doesn't support Thunderbolt, but hopefully by the end of the year, we'll get a firmware update that supports USB 4.0. All the previous Razers had smaller keycaps, and Razer has slightly increased the size of the keycaps to make it easier to type on. Overall, it's definitely an improvement, and they have bigger shift keys, and instead of using cutouts and then placing the speakers inside, the speaker grills are now machine cut, or laser cut rather, in the factory, and it just makes the deck look a lot cleaner. The mouse or trackpad is still the same as the previous one, so if you've used previous Razer Blades, you'll feel right at home. The symmetry is great, it's directly in the middle, and it feels super accurate to use. The next improvement is the mux switch. There wasn't really one on the previous model, but now you can go into Razer Synapse and select dedicated GPU only. This does require a hard restart, but once you boot back up, you'll be using the dedicated GPU only. And you can also switch back and forth between 60 Hz and 165 Hz, depending on whether or not you want to save battery life. Another big change is the performance modes. On my previous Razer Blade, there's only a balanced and custom mode. With the newer models, you get balanced, custom, and silent mode. And the one thing they did improve this year is the fan noise. On my older model, it would get close to like 60 decibels, which was really loud when things were like really pushing the laptop. The max these fans will get on the 2022 model is around 53 decibels. And trust me, every decibel you go up is a big difference in noise. So keeping it at 53 decibels when things are on max is a big difference compared to other gaming laptops. Now, the display is exactly the same. This is the 2560 by 1440 version with an IPS panel. Great color gamut and color accuracy, but the screen brightness is still about average. It's a very punchy panel. Like if I'm gaming on this, games look fantastic. If I have to do any design work on this, I feel totally comfortable using this display. The other improvement is the Windows Hello camera. It can still log you in using your face, but it's now a 2 megapixel camera, so it supports 1080p. Now this model I have here is the Ryzen 9 6900H X paired with 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory. You have a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD. It's a Gen 4 drive, and of course that beautiful 14-inch display. And in terms of CPU performance, it's pretty much identical to the 5900HX in last year's version. The multi-core speeds are almost the same. The only difference is that the newer 6000 series is providing better single-core clock speeds, and that really makes a difference, maybe more at 1920 by 1080, but if you're playing games at QHD or higher, you're not going to see that much of a difference in terms of CPU performance. Now, if you're using the Adobe suite, this is a slight upgrade, not so much because of the CPU, but more so to do with the fact that the 3070 Ti in here is faster than the RTX 3080 that I tested last year. Same holds true if you're a developer. Like if you have last year's model, this is not an upgrade, okay? I compiled Mozilla Firefox at the exact same time. Now, if you're a gamer, the 3070 Ti on this guy performs very well. In fact, it beat out the RTX 3080 both at 1920 and QHD, or 2560 by 1440. At 1920 by 1080, I got about 13 frames per second more compared to the RTX 3080 from last year. But I do have a gut feeling there's a reason why they didn't send me the RTX 3080 Ti. And I think because the difference between the 3070 Ti and the 3080 Ti is very minimal, maybe like a few frames per second. So if you're considering this laptop, I would probably go for the 3070 Ti. I feel like that's going to be the sweet spot, and that's going to give you the best bang for buck in terms of performance. Now, thermals in this year's model are conservative, but they are better than the previous version. It can sometimes get up to 93, 94 degrees Celsius, but then it drops down into the 80s and it stays there until things cool off. Clock speeds were still nice, the performance didn't suffer too much, and I feel like these AMD processors are made for the type of tuning that Razer wants to do. Intel tends to run a bit too hot still, and I find that Razer has to nerf the performance of the processor a bit too much to keep thermals down, and I find with AMD, they have a lot more leg room. Internally, it's identical to the previous model. You still got the big vapor chamber cooler right in the middle with two big fans on the left and right. You have a swappable NVMe SSD. This is a Gen 4 drive, and the read and write speeds are double of what the previous version can do. And then you do have a swappable Wi-Fi 6E card. You do have a 61 watt-hour battery, which is the same as the previous version, but I am getting slightly better battery life. Last year's model, I got about 5 hours and 30 minutes. This one's giving me 5 hours and 52 minutes. The only thing I don't like about this laptop, and this was my complaint last year, is that it can only go up to 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it happens to be soldered onto the motherboard. Now, obviously, there's engineering reasons why it can't happen on a laptop this size, but that's where we're at right now. Now, if you're gaming, this is probably not a big deal, but if you're buying this, let's say for creative work and gaming, the RAM limitation might bother you. So the 2022 model is not a massive update, like I said in the beginning of the video, but it does take a few things and refines it. You have better fan noise, better thermals, you have slightly bigger keycaps, DDR5 memory, and better performance being utilized with the GPU compared to last year's version. This is not a massive upgrade if you have last year's model. Like, trust me, you do not need this. This is not an upgrade for you at all, but I still think it's one of the best 14-inch gaming notebooks because it takes the AMD processor, which I feel like fits Razer's tuning better than the Intel ones because they're so conservative, and it pairs it with a beefy NVIDIA RTX card. If you go with the G14, it does have a beefy GPU, but it's an AMD GPU. And if you go with the Alienware X14, don't go with the Alienware X14. It's overpriced and pretty weak compared to this. I just feel like this is one of the better 14-inch gaming laptops in the market right now, if you don't mind having 16 gigabytes of RAM. If you do, and you're doing other things, then this is not the one for you. But if you're strictly gaming and that's it, then this is a nice little refinement. So that wraps up this review. Stay tuned. I will be comparing this to the G14. So if you have any questions about that, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys in the next one.